In this lesson, we'll continue creating the handle and learn how to use control loops. Alright, so before we can really put this Turbo Smooth to work, we really need to get the overall shape of our handle. Now looking at this, let me go ahead and go to my Edit Poly modifier. And notice whenever I do that, we lose our Turbo Smooth look to that. And the reason that we lose that is because we're moving up and down in our modifier stack, and it's only going to show us exactly what we have selected in the modifier stack. So in order to see the end result, which is our Turbo Smooth applied, we want to use the Show End Result toggle here. Now we can left click on that and you'll see that that comes back showing us our Turbo Smooth, but we're still working under the Edit Poly. Now we also created a keyboard shortcut to quickly go back and forth with this, and that is 9 on the keyboard. Alright, so now that we have this, let's go ahead and continue to work on our shape. Now whenever I'm working on the overall shape, I tend to turn off that Show End Result because I'm not really worried about that at this point. What I really want is the main shape blocked out. So I'm going to select these polygons right here, and I'm also going to select the ones on this side as well. Okay, and what I want to do is I want to pull these out. Okay, now I can do this a couple of different ways. I could extrude this straight out, okay, and create another segment, okay, and then I could scale these, okay, to create the ridge that I want across the edges here. Okay, and this is totally fine, nothing wrong with this. Or what I could do, just to make my life a little bit easier during the smoothing process, is I could just add some swift loops all the way around and pull those polygons out. So let's hit Control Shift and S for our swift loop tool. And remember, for that keyboard shortcut to work, you need to make sure that you have that keyboard shortcut set up from the first lesson. So I'm going to create a loop right here across the top, and then I'm going to create one across the bottom as well. Okay, so now that I have both of those control loops set, let's reselect these polygons on the outside, and with those selected, I'm going to go ahead and convert my selection from polygon to vertex mode. So I'm going to hold down Control, convert that to vertex, and then grab my scale tool, and let's scale that out in the Y. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a ridge across the side of my handle, which is exactly what I want here. Now, I'm really not happy with the overall width of this just yet. So I'm going to select all the vertices and I'm going to scale those in on the Y just to make that a little bit thinner across the top, and everything else is looking good. Okay, so now that I have the basic shape that I want out of my object, what I want to do next is I want to show end result. Okay, you can also hit 9 on the keyboard. And by doing this, you'll notice that we're still losing the volume that we've created. It's getting a little bit too smooth in some of these areas. So in order to retain our volume that we want out of our original object, we need to create what's called control loops. Now these control loops we can create using the Swift Loop tool just like we've been doing. But let's go ahead and give it a little bit more explanation than that. We're showing the end result, so let's go ahead and go to Edge mode, and you'll notice that this cage pops up. And that cage is representing what the original model looks like. Now we're going to be using this cage to create our cuts and to create our models, whereas the Turbo Smooth modifier is just going to show us the end result in that high poly fashion. So to make this a little bit easier to see for me, I'm going to scroll down to my surface properties, or my subdivision surface properties, or parameters, and you'll see that I have this show cage. Now the cage is displaying in this orange and yellow color. The orange is what the cage looks like without any segments selected, and then the yellow represents the edges that are selected. So to make this easier for me to see, I'm going to change the original cage from this orange to something kind of like a blue-green. Okay, might even make it a little bit more blue. We'll hit OK on that, and then I'm going to take the yellow color, which is my selected edges, and you can see those here. But I'm going to make it easier for me. I'm going to change that to red, and then we'll hit OK. So now that I have the color of my cage created, let's come in and let's start to add some more loops to tighten up some of this volume. So I'm going to hit Control, Shift, and S to go to my Swift Loop tool. And one thing that I want you to notice is that this corner right across the top, this is rounded out quite a bit. Okay, it's not retaining that same shape that we had with our original object. So in order to bring this corner back and trying to retain that volume, I need to cut across that corner just like this. So let's left click one time and around a distance like that. You'll notice that it brings that back and brings that that volume back in there. So it's looking really good at this point. Okay. Now the closer you get to that edge, let's hold down Control Alt and then left click and drag on that loop that we just created. And you'll notice this allows us to move that segment. Now the further we get away from the end, the smoother that line becomes on those corners. So we don't get as much volume. But the closer we get to that corner, the higher the volume is going to be, and it becomes a very tight corner. So we're going to release it right about there, and you'll see that we get a very nice edge along that. So let's come up to this end and let's try that same thing. So you'll see that that corner is rounded off, so we want to cut across that corner. So left click and create your smooth or your Swift loop, and then hold down Control Alt, and you can move that back or forward depending on how tight you want that corner to be. Alright, so let's turn off edge mode, and I'm just going to deselect that. Just take a look at the volume that you've created for the handle of this machete. So now that I've created some control loops, let's take a look at our top view under vertex mode. So let's hit 1 on the keyboard with Edit Polygon. Let's take a look at our top view by hitting T, and you'll notice that the handle is still very flat. So what I want to do is I want to take these middle segments right here. With my scale tool activated, let's scale that out in the Y just to make that a little bit more round, to give it a little bit more thickness in the middle. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing right here at the end just to give that a little bit more of a flare, and also at this end. Okay, start flaring that out some. Now remember, whenever you're modeling or pulling these vertices around, you're moving the original cage, the original model. And what we're really striving for is the end result, and that's with the Turbo Smooth modifier applied. So don't pay so much attention to the control cage trying to match the shape of the high poly model. You want to move that control cage to give us the result we want in the Turbo Smooth itself. Okay, so everything's looking really good at this point. I'm really happy with the shape. We've learned the basics of how control loops work and how to create them using the Swift Loop tool, which is going to be the way that I create almost all of the control loops. I'll show you a couple of different ways of doing that in a little while, once we start getting more and more detail. So in our next lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to begin creating details in our high poly models. So these details, they're not fine details, but they're going to be our hero details, if you will. These are going to be details that are like subtracted cylinders out of the object. So let's say that there's a hole drilled in it, or let's say that we need a cylinder for something like a screw to fit into. We may have some details that just change the shape of the object. So we're going to see a couple of those different examples in our next lesson. So I'll see you then.